5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to our podcast. To be honest, it's really just mine. This is Nappy Time with your host, Mrs. Nappi. We're here sharing stories and life lessons from anyone and everyone that I feel like talking to. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is, well, that's complicated, like myself. But I was born Christina Marissa Macpherson Porrero Mortimer Rincon. And if that wasn't a mouthful enough, I had a lisp. So I couldn't get past my first name and was definitely not making any attempts at becoming Marita. So I made it my own name. The name was Nina. I think I got it from some of the soap operas my mom watched at the time. I'm not really sure. But it was devoid of all S's and similar, in my opinion, to the sound of Christina. But neither of those are what most people call me. Most people who know me call me Neen, because 2 syllables was just too much. And then there are those who make my day. Those people call me Mrs. Nappi. And made especially just for them, this is Nappy Time. Welcome, one and all, to the very first episode of Nappy Time with your host, yours truly, Mrs. Christina Nina Neen Nappi. This episode is a combination of my first day back in class this past September and ideas from where I sit today. So get comfy and get ready to hear my story. Well, at least some of it. Everyone has a story to tell, whether shared by fire, at a meal with friends, on the lap of a grandparent, through books or memories, and even our own writing. Our stories have the power to open doors. Because each story we share brings us closer to those who hear it. Stories have the power to break down walls, unite people, and help us understand ourselves and the world around us. They are the single most powerful change maker in the world, because once you're affected by someone's story, that story lasts forever. This is my story. It's a story of challenge, redemption, perseverance, and resilience. It is a story I hope that will encourage you to keep going, even when that feels like the hardest thing to do. It is the story of a sweet girl who one day became someone else without warning. Throughout my early childhood, things seemed perfect. I had a mom, a dad, a home, and an older sister. Of course, nothing is ever perfect, and I know now that that's more than okay. But in the beginning, it really did feel like it was perfect. Looking back, I was just young. My older sister from my dad's previous marriage is 11 years older than me. My dad's a lawyer who worked late in the city, and my mom got hit with a huge bout of depression during some of my most formative years. All this before she came out, and my parents announced their divorce. And also just as I was about to nosedive into my first depressive episode. Seemingly out of nowhere, I left behind my smiles and laughter for anger, sadness, and pain. This could have easily been explained by the separation of my parents, I know, but for that I was glad. And it was much more than that. Things changed. I changed. It's hard to explain exactly what it was like, but the best words I have are that it felt like pieces of me were just falling away. Everything felt heavy and dark, devoid of life. The days, like walking shadows, as I strutted and fretted my hour upon the stage. Life was nothing more than a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, meaning nothing. Or at least that's what it felt like. Right, Shakes? What was the point, I felt like, of this tedious behavior of living when everything was just so useless? Sadly, my depression created an anger and an apathy inside me that lasted a very long time. My dad's family is Scotch-Irish, and the stereotype used to really fit. That is until a handful of us got sober. At the time of my depression, I also had undiagnosed ADHD, and both are conditions that kind of beg for escape. So I took up the tried and true family tradition of drinking and smoking. Yes, both. From the time I was 13 to 27, doctor medicated or not, I'd like to say there was a period where I stopped, but the truth is if I stopped one thing, I just made up for it with another. I was hanging out with people I was embarrassed to be around. People who after high school were in the same exact place that I had left them. And the stakes were getting higher. The further I got into my addiction, the more opportunities there were for what I used to refer to as more. In other words, the more I used, the more I was offered. More on this in a future episode. For now, I just wanted to give you some context into my adolescence because my past struggles, they're what drive everything I do. From the way I support my students to the fact that I teach mindfulness to sharing stories of resilience to creating this podcast. Everything I do is meant to say, I get it. I've been there too. And here's how we can start to change things for ourselves. Self-care is probably the most critical thing we can offer ourselves. As we find ways to show ourselves that we do actually care for our well-being, we create self-worth and start to identify our personal values. We might even figure out where our boundaries are and how to uphold them. We learn a lot about ourselves in this process, and with kindness, grace, and persistence, we find that not only can we climb, we can rise as well. I hope the stories you hear will lift you up and hold you there. And without further ado, it's nappy time. Hello, Mrs. Nappi, and welcome to our first revised episode of Nappy Time. Hello and thank you! I'm so excited to be here, and we're really excited to have you. Can you start by telling the audience a little bit about what you do? Of course! I do a lot of things. It's 100% the ADHD. But all joking aside, I've tackled quite a few jobs and challenges over the years. After graduating Monmouth Regional, I attended Rowan University, where I switched from a 5-year master's program in elementary and special education to a liberal arts major in English with a minor in human psychology. Side note, this is not an example of the struggles of my life. What started out as like the fulfillment of a simple young dream to be a teacher or even to be a therapist turned into me challenging and ultimately engaging myself in the human story. It's these stories, the stories of our lives and our imaginations, that are what mold us into thinkers and doers. As I like to tell my students, thoughts create feelings and feelings create action. Stories give us the opportunity to think, feel, and ultimately do better. So I temporarily left my education degree behind to immerse myself in story. Once I graduated, I attended Georgian Court University at first. It was another attempt to become dual certified, and it's kind of funny because I never did. Even though today my special education students are some of my favorite. Fortunately, you can learn how to work with all different kinds of people simply by understanding people. And how do you do that? Through story. But Georgian Court wasn't offering me the kind of education I was looking for. I wanted something more. This is a theme in my life, by the way. So I transferred to Monmouth University, where I completed my master's in teaching for secondary education English. And that was exactly where I belonged. Here's where the job list should pay attention. I've always been a dreamer, and one of my dreams was actually to teach at my old high school with my husband. So once I got him in the door, thank you, Aunt Karen, connections, I reached out to my old English teacher, who, by the way, I really need to write back right now. But not right now, later. And I asked her if she would consider hosting me as a student teacher. Normally, she declined such inquiries, but since she remembered me and somehow fondly remembered me, she quickly agreed. And therein began my now 17-year career at the school I graduated from. If I actually had a different host for this episode, this would be the part where the host says, wow, 17 years? So you've been at Monmouth Regional for technically 22 years if you count high school. That's like half your life. And then she would say, well, now seems like as good a time as any to start answering student listener questions. To which I, the guest, would answer, yes, yes it does.
Welcome to Nappy Time. Today we are hosting Miss Nappi. We are asking her some questions today and how she's doing and everything with her life. So, Miss Nappi, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well today. I'm happy to be back at work, and I'm ready to go. I'd like you to note the excitement in my voice just there, because I am currently on medical leave again.
So, what inspired you to be a teacher, or what is your memory from school?
When I was growing up, I used to play school. I was one of those little school nerds, and so I really wanted to be a teacher. All the way through, definitely third grade. I had a really great third grade teacher, and I loved her. So originally I wanted to go into elementary school, and that's what I went to college for. I went to college for elementary and special education. And then I realized that I didn't really vibe with the elementary crowd, not the kids, the people in the profession. So I decided to look into high school after taking public speaking in college because I really loved public speaking. I was pretty good at it. So I decided to do that. I chose English, interestingly enough, because I found it challenging. And I liked reading, but it wasn't my best subject, so I knew I could get better at it. And then I chose it in terms of teaching because I feel like with something like English, you can cover all bases. You can talk about everything, and you can do a lot of different creative stuff too. So that's why I picked that. And then in terms of my high school experience, it sucked. It was an awful high school experience, and I think that's part of why, actually I know that's partly why I wanted to become a teacher. Because in high school, I dealt with a lot of mental health issues, a lot of depression, a lot of substance use, totally affected how I did in school, but nobody knew, right? So it was more like I was labeled a bad kid than anything else. So everyone was just kind of looking out to see what wrong I did rather than why I might have been doing things wrong. And so I felt like if I came into education, I could kind of create a space where students like me had a better opportunity to do well in school and to get better overall. Fun fact, last year when I finally did get diagnosed with ADHD, I figured out that one of the reasons I can offer so many modifications and accommodations to assignments, different ways to do things for my students, is because my brain goes in 17 different directions. It's not all bad, folks. And with zero transition.
How are you truly feeling in life?
So deep, right away, we're so deep. Honestly, I'm feeling really good. Last year was a huge transition year for me. There was a lot of stuff going on in my life personally that was really difficult. But I honestly feel like I've rounded a corner. Let me take it back a minute. So ever since my husband's heart attack, which was about 5 or 6 years ago, life has been super rocky, where he had COVID in between that, and then my own health issues in between that, and other things going on in my life. So I feel like it all ended at the beginning of this summer. And I had an amazing summer, and then I ended up with COVID and an appendicitis, but I didn't even care because my summer was so good. So I'm feeling great. In post-recording on June 25th, 2024, things are a little different. Stay tuned for another episode down the road.
How did you decide that you wanted to teach mindfulness?
How did I decide I wanted to teach mindfulness? Very similar to my high school experience. When I started teaching, I realized that there were tons of kids in my class with extreme anxiety. And it was interesting to me because their anxiety was actually about their schoolwork, which was very foreign to me. I cared about my grades in high school, but it wasn't the main stressor in my life. The main stressor in my life was my family life. And so I was curious about these kids who, different from my generation had a lot of substance abuse problems. That wasn't the case with these kids. I mean, there were some, right? There always are. But these kids more so just seemed on edge all the time and felt like they had to do everything perfectly, and would get really nervous when an assignment came up. So I started incorporating meditation into the class when we covered transcendentalism. And that's all of the kind of first hippie generation of writers. So we practiced meditation, and some of them were oh my God, I've never felt like that before. I've never felt that sense of calm ever in my life, right? And so I decided, I know a lot about this. I've been practicing yoga since I was 18. I'm trained in it. So let me put together a class that can help everyone with all of those coping skills that I've learned over time. And so that's what I wanted to do.
How would you address someone that says we should be putting more effort into our core subjects, not taking electives like mindfulness?
Why is a class like this vital to student learning or growth? Because that's really my opinion. I think a class like this really helps overall student learning. So I created the class to give students the tools to cope with stress, communicate effectively, and navigate the challenges of life. Without the tools for self-awareness, self-management, we often lose ourselves and our goals for ourselves. So when we're not well in one area of our life, it affects all the other areas of our lives. So the skills that you learn in here are really paramount to not just your education, but your life in general, because it's how you go about doing things. So if someone were to say we should be putting more effort into our core subjects, I would say when a student is overwhelmed, anxious, and not well in general, they can't learn, right? If you feel unsafe, if you feel like something's going on in your life that's chaotic, it's really impossible to actually retain information that you're learning. But a student practicing mindfulness, on the other hand, is more equipped to handle these challenges. They know how to ask for help, they're more resilient to setbacks, they have better time management, and they're self-aware enough to know and see their own mistakes. We know this because there's a multitude of research on mindfulness that illustrates these benefits. So if you want to do well in all your other subjects, it's definitely a helpful thing.
How would you address someone who is apprehensive because they think mindfulness is related to religion?
So mindfulness is not a religious practice. It can be considered a spiritual practice, but it doesn't have to be. I would first remind this person that obviously we're in a public school, so we can't teach about religion, number one. But beyond that, I would explain that mindfulness is a very secular practice. That means like non-religious. There's no prayer, no worship of any deity. It has none of the elements that qualify a philosophy as a religion. Buddhism, however, is both a way of life and a religion. As a philosophy, without attachment to the Buddha, it's beautiful and contains all of the moral and ethical tenets of any religion. So Buddhism is an old philosophy and an old religious practice that mindfulness drew elements from, specifically observing, not being judgmental, and kind of the morals and ethics of it. So for instance, some of the morals and ethics of Buddhism are right speech. In other words, using words that are true and also kind. Right mindfulness, right action, right view. So the way you look at different things. Right effort, concentration. So really, Buddhism, the philosophy, and mindfulness is about being a good person to yourself, being a good person to other people. Because many yogis were in fact Buddhists, it makes sense to address Buddhism's influence from a historical perspective. However, the class is about how to be able to sit in non-judgmental awareness of what is. And the practice is using daily opportunities to investigate, explore, and choose our thoughts, actions, and therefore feelings.
So my question to you is, what kind of work do we do in this class, and are there any tests here?
That's a great question. So the kind of work that we do in this class is all considered practice. In other words, it's a tool that you're practicing using to help you in your life. So you might get something like, we might make a sleep goal, right? And we might say we're going to try to set a consistent bedtime and have a night routine, right? And so I would have you write down what your night routine is, and then you would just like log. Did I go to bed at the time I wanted to, right? And then how do I feel the next day based on when I went to bed, okay? So it's all practices for you, about you. And then, no, there's definitely not any tests. Tests provoke anxiety, and honestly, this class is about finding tools to help you move forward in life the way that you want to move forward. So we don't need tests.
You say that this class is about finding tools and how we want to move on. So then how should I deal with stress or anger? Normally people say that it takes like a deep breath, but that doesn't work for me. So how would I try different situations?
Yeah, so we're going to go over a lot of different ways to deal with stress and anger, and my daughter's the same way. She says that breathing is overrated, and she refuses to breathe for me. So some other ways that we can deal with stress and anger are using DBT skills, which are dialectical behavioral therapy. And these are just like skills that help us ground and distract ourselves. So for instance, and you'll see this on Wednesday in the Wednesday Wellness commercial, using your 5 senses, right? If you're either like overactivated emotionally in any way, it doesn't have to be anger, you might say, all right, well, how am I feeling right now? What does my body actually feel like? And so for me right now, I have goosebumps on my arms because of the air. It's a little chilly right under here, okay? What do I see? I see all my students. I see some of them smiling, some of them having their heads down, some of them looking at me, but I see all of them, okay? What do I hear? I hear the hum of the air conditioning. What do I taste? I taste the mint that I just ate in my mouth. Okay, so here's one that I really like. Sometimes when you know how you get hot when you're angry? Okay, so another cool DBT skill is changing the temperature of your body. So if you get really hot when you're angry, grabbing something cold, getting an ice pack or something like that will actually help your body cool down, which will activate your nervous system and be like, no, we're settling, right? So that's a cool thing, and we'll get into a lot more.
Okay, and have you ever really had a student that came full circle and became more reflective and thoughtful?
I've had quite a few students, thankfully, who have done that. I have some students who are doing this as a profession now, which is really cool. One in particular, I remember, had me for junior year English, and in that class, we meditated when we studied transcendentalism. It blew his mind. He was an angry kid with a difficult home situation, and he realized that he had found something that could help with that. He reached out recently and said that he still remembers all the lessons I taught him. When it comes to the girls, they tend to lock in almost right away, as they're no stranger to self-judgment. The guys, on the other hand, tend to take a little longer. In fact, I recently had an old student reach out to me and thank me because while he hadn't taken the class seriously, he did learn how to meditate and breathe. He had written to tell me that he had a traumatic experience while firefighting that sent him into drinking heavily. He eventually remembered what he had learned and started applying it and wanted to tell me how much it had helped.
What types of activities can we do to help us be more mindful in our daily lives?
Cool. So literally anything. The practice of mindfulness is simply non-judgmental observation of what is. Okay. So the first way I would suggest to engage in a mindfulness practice is to notice your thoughts, right? Notice your thoughts, observe your thoughts, but without judgment. Notice the things that you say to yourself. Okay, that's really important. How do you talk to yourself? And when you notice that, once you notice, you get to evaluate. Do I like what I'm doing right now? Is this helpful for me? Is it not helpful for me? And then from there, you get to make a decision. So being mindful is literally about observing without judgment and then responding rather than reacting. Okay? So some ways that I do this in my life can be as simple as even my ride here this morning. Okay? My husband and I have to drive here together, which sucks because he likes to listen to really annoying, loud podcasts, and I like to listen to music. So we both wear headphones, and I had music on my headphones, and it was raining. And normally I like to listen to upbeat music on the way to work, but because it was raining, there was kind of like a chill vibe going on. So I put on some Billie Eilish, and I just like watched the rain on my way here instead of playing on my phone, right? Which is easy to do, and I've done plenty of times. So even just that singular act is an act of mindfulness. I'm choosing to settle down, to kind of just enjoy the music and enjoy what's around me. That's it. Okay.
What helps you keep your stress and anxiety down after a stressful event passes or is coming up?
Yeah, so I've had many stressful events in my life, as I'm sure you have as well. If I know a stressful event is coming up, I will literally plan time for myself. Like, I'll go through my calendar and I'll be like, what are my responsibilities? Where can I squeeze in time for just me? And that could be for me to read, for me to exercise, but whatever I feel like doing, right? So I'll make sure that that time's there, because if I don't take that time for myself, I'm definitely going to get overwhelmed and lose it. So when I'm in a stressful situation, I am somebody who breathing really works for. And I honestly think that once you start to practice breathing more often, it would be easier for it to work for you. I'm not saying it'll work hands down. But for me, when I'm in a stressful situation, I try to notice how my body feels, okay? So one of the best practices in mindfulness is to become aware of how your body feels and to get familiar with how your body feels. So if you notice that your shoulders are tight or rounding, if you notice you're tensing, if you notice you're sitting like this, whatever it is, try to get aware of your body and see, why does my body feel like this? Is there something going on, right? And if there's something going on, then like you know there's something going on that's stressful, ask yourself, most important question you can ever ask yourself in life, what do I need right now? Okay? So when you ask yourself that question, what do I need right now? Your answer might be like, I need to just be. I need to be alone. I need to take a walk, right?
What do you do in your free time?
Okay, interesting question. Let's see, what do I do in my free time? I spend a lot of time with my family. I have 2 younger daughters, 12 and 9, and they require a lot of attention. My older one has a lot of social anxiety, and my younger one has ADHD, and I think the whole family does, to be honest with you. but they require a lot of time, and I love to be with them. So I do a lot of that in my free time. Other things that I do in my free time that are more fun. Mr. Nappi and I go to concerts. So over the summer, we went to go see Snoop Dogg, and then we also went to go see Pantera Metallica. So these are all very old 90s groups that you may or may not know, and that's fine. What else do I like to do in my free time? I like to shop, but I don't do it that often, so I usually shop online. I do like to read. I like being active. Like, I love getting outside and just doing anything outside if the weather's nice. So whether it's like walking or like going to the park, I love being outside. What else do I do in my free time? I try to learn to do other things in my free time. So this year, taking drum lessons. And I should have already started, but I'm not allowed to drum until I'm like healed. So I'm excited about that. And what else? Oh, I'm learning Spanish, so I'm working on that. So yeah, I try to learn different things because I really like learning. What else do you got for me? When is the best time to meditate? I think it really depends on your personal preference. I like meditating whenever I feel the need to just calm down. So like when you meditate, it can be 5 minutes, it can be 1 minute, it can be 30 minutes, right? So sometimes like I'll be driving in the car. I have post-traumatic stress disorder from some car accidents as well as other things. So sometimes when I'm driving in the car and my husband drives like he does in the city, my nervous system goes to here, right? So literally in the car, I will just kind of like take a few deep breaths, maybe close my eyes for a second. And then that's like my tiny meditation, right? Tiny one so that I can just like be in the car with him. When I'm in school, I do it in the mornings because I have to get up and it's the only time of day my house is quiet because everybody else is still sleeping. At nighttime, I usually listen to one to go to bed. So at nighttime is my favorite time because instead of like actively meditating, I put on a guided meditation and it puts me right to sleep. But there's no best time to meditate. It's really like whatever works for you. I personally like the morning because I'm tired enough that I actually want to sit instead of move around. Okay, yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, meditation isn't just closing your eyes and be like, right? Meditation is that single focus. So when I'm in a loud setting, one of the things, just one tip I like to do is either like doodle or color, because that can be very meditative and I can still do it when there's noise around. So that's a good tip.
What are some go-to breathing techniques for instant stress relief?
Awesome. So one of the best breathing techniques that is widely used is called 4-part breathing or box breathing. And it's used for people who have dealt with PTSD. It was actually introduced to soldiers with PTSD for their coping strategies. I think the Navy is who introduced it first. And so it's very effective for a lot of people. And all it is inhaling to the count of 4, holding your breath for 4 counts, exhaling for 4 counts, and then holding the breath for 4 counts. So you inhale, you hold, you exhale, and you hold. Okay. And then you do that as many times as you need to. We'll practice it together one day. But that's a really great go-to breathing strategy. Other than that, the one that I taught you the other day, the 3-part breath where you breathe into the belly and the rib cage and the chest and then kind of let the shoulders drop as you exhale.
Do you believe school can cause a toll on a student's life?
Absolutely. I mean, aren't you guys living evidence of that? That school can take a toll on people's lives? Absolutely. I think that a lot of times, and this shouldn't be surprising to you, but I think that a lot of times teachers expect school to be completely separate from like the rest of your life. and that your rest of your life has nothing to do with school, when in fact they both impact each other greatly, right? So who we are in school is still who we are at home, and the stuff that we deal with at home comes to school with us, and vice versa, right? So that stress that we have even about school is going to show up in the home in the way that we react with maybe our parents or our siblings. So absolutely.
What is your opinion on social media?
So yeah, definitely, this is a good question. Social media. I've had a lot of experience with social media. I was like in my 20s, maybe, when MySpace came out, before Facebook was even a thing. So I kind of grew up with social media. I was even all the way back into, when I grew up, there was like AOL Instant Messenger, and that was like our first kind of form. But either way, I've used it a whole bunch. I used to post tons of stuff on Facebook all the time. I had multiple Instagram accounts where I would do different things on them, and I realized I was spending so much time doing that stuff and not any time doing all of the other hobbies that I love to do, like reading or making something artistic, or like just being bored enough to have to find something else to do, which sometimes is important for us to sit there and be bored. So I eventually started taking breaks from social media, sometimes just like a couple days, and then sometimes a week, and started challenging myself in that way. And because I took those little moments to take breaks, I would notice how I would behave differently, and the things that I would choose to do that was different. And so it kind of gave me the motivation to be like, all right, I don't want to spend the majority of my time doing this stuff. And also I think, this shouldn't be surprising to you, when we look into another person's life, we only see it through the filter that they've allowed us to see it through. Yet our brain makes comparisons regardless of what we know intellectually, because that's what brains do. So a lot of times social media can be really hard on an individual's self-esteem, right? And so that was another reason that I wanted to take a step back. So eventually, when COVID came around, I got off social media completely. I stayed off of it for like 2 years. And just recently, I went back to my Instagram because I miss all of my old students, and they're all on there. So now I just check in maybe once a day, see if I'm talking to anybody. Maybe I'll post something. Like yesterday, I posted about Mr. Nappi's success, obviously. So now I have a lot more clear boundaries between me and social media. And I think that's really the key, is you can use social media, but there needs to be time boundaries for yourself. How long am I using it? What am I using it for? When do I know that I should stop using it? So when we have those boundaries in place, I think social media can be pretty healthy.
What are some of your healthy coping mechanisms?
That is a great question, because as I was growing up, I had very unhealthy coping mechanisms. I think I mentioned to a lot of you that I'm a recovering addict, I'm a recovering alcoholic. So those were my go-to coping mechanisms, as well as just like wild behavior, right? I'm like, I'll just escape. Escape is my coping mechanism. Funny thing, though, about escape and trying to numb your feelings, you can't numb your feelings selectively. Or you can't be like, oh, I feel like crap, so I'm going to numb that feeling. Because then you end up numbing the happiness that you're going to feel as well. So obviously I had to find healthier coping mechanisms. And the first healthy coping mechanism that I jumped into, which was a really easy jump, was fitness. And by jumping into fitness, I had something to do with my body that would kind of occupy my mind and also give me a shot of endorphins so that I would feel better. So I started with movement, more sunshine. During COVID, I had like a sun lamp so that I would get some vitamin D and just that feeling of warmth.
Guys, the lack of dialogue between these conversations is frightening. We need some transitions.
Do you believe in the saying, you are who you hang out with?
Oh, that was a good question. What do you guys think? Are you who you hang out with?
No.
So in my experience, I wasn't, no. I did similar things to the people I hung out with, but I wasn't the same person as the people I hung out with. I didn't have the same values. I didn't have the same beliefs. And so coming from a parental perspective, when I look at my daughter, who has like very strong foundation of beliefs and values. So when I look at my daughter, who has a very strong foundation of beliefs and values, and I think about the friends that she hangs out with that are wild, I know that just because they're doing stupid stuff doesn't mean she's always going to do it. She might do it sometimes, right? But I know she has a good enough head about her to make those decisions for herself. So I can't say that she's like her friends, or like you can't hang out with that person because they're a bad influence. So I would say, no, I don't believe that.
Is missing out of things because of school or sport really worth it in the long run?
So this is an important question, and I feel like probably a lot of you can relate to it. Is missing out or is participating in a sport and school worth missing out on other things? And I think that's a really personal question. If you are passionate about the sport that you play and it brings you joy and it helps you like make friends and all those things, then absolutely, you're not really making a sacrifice. But if you feel like you're not getting time to socialize and you're not getting time to take care of yourself and you're stressed out all the time, absolutely not worth it, right?
How do I know if I should trust certain people?
That's a really hard one. And I will say for a long time after having difficult experiences in other relationships, it's difficult to trust other people, and we tend to build up walls, right? So that we protect ourselves from getting hurt from other people. And that's what I did for a long, long time. And once I kind of went through recovery and I was really engaged in my yoga and mindfulness practice, I started to realize that the only way to really connect with people was to be my true self and to kind of be vulnerable, which means that I have to kind of inherently trust who I'm speaking with and hope that if I'm authentic, they will be authentic back to me. And sometimes I'm wrong, right? But that's life. Then I learn a lesson from that experience. So, I don't know, did I answer the question fully?
How do I know if I'm making the right decision when going to college?
So making the right decision going to college, that's a big one for a lot of you right now. And I would say for me, this was my experience. I don't know if you mean going to college in general or just like what college to go to, but I think it's really important to go visit the college that you want to go to because you have to be able to see yourself living there, right? You have to be comfortable with the environment. So that was really important to me. In terms of whether or not you want to go to college or if college is the right choice for you, obviously that's going to have something to do with your family dynamics, right? However, again, coming back to like, what is it I truly want, right? What do I want to do? What lights me up? What am I really passionate about? And do I need college for that, right? And if I do, and college would be helpful, right? Then go to college. It's a great opportunity and it's super fun. But if you can start working right out of high school and you know what you want to do and you're great with that, do you, right?
Where did you go to college?
I went to Rowan. I went to Rowan University. I loved it there. And then I did my master's at Monmouth, but I wasn't on campus, so it was different. Any other questions we got? I know we're almost done.
Do you think everyone has a purpose in life?
Yes, 100%, absolutely. I don't think we always know our purpose. So for instance, Mr. Nappi and I were talking about where he's at, right, in life. And where we came from, because we were both quote-unquote bad kids, right? He barely graduated high school, and now he's a state teacher of the year. So one of the things he had said to me in this conversation we were having is he was like, I always felt like I was destined to do something, right? And I think a lot of us feel that way, right? We feel like we have some kind of purpose. And if we don't feel that way yet, it's just because we haven't explored who we are enough and what we like. So absolutely, 100%, each one of us has a purpose. We just kind of have to figure out what makes us tick. When did I find my purpose, or how did I find my purpose? So I've always wanted to be a teacher, which I think I mentioned to you, but I don't think I knew why I wanted to teach and what my purpose was until I actually started teaching and meeting students who needed much more than educational support. And I think once I made that connection and was able to figure out how to help students in the areas that they needed help in, that's when I found my purpose, because it was so fulfilling to be able to do that. So I think that's what you're looking for, is that sense of fulfillment with the work that you do.
And with that, we round out the first revised episode of Nappy Time with Mrs. Nappi and her mindfulness class of 2023-2024. Stay tuned for what's to come, and feel free to reach out with questions you want me to answer.